Do you need a mental reset? There has been multiple times in my life where I was in fight or flight. I am fighting for the safety of my children. I'm fighting for the life of my children. I am fighting with doctors over the catastrophic epilepsy that my son was going through. Or I felt like running away. Have you ever just sat in a room like overwhelmed with all of the responsibilities, the hardship, the pain that you're going through, and you just want to run? My name is Dr. B. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner with over 25 years of clinical experience, but my real experience comes from my life. I have lost 3 children and my husband over the course of 20 years. My son Johnny in a drowning accident in 2005. Within a year, my son Reggie started having catastrophic epilepsy, and he died 10 years later after 10 years of medical trauma. My daughter Maya died in her sleep from sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. And then my husband succumbed to the same disorder a couple years later. So I understand hardship, pain, grief, trauma. And in the midst of that, I created the Mentally Strong Method. And right now, I am doing something called Mentally Strong Reset. So what is that? It is where you can experience the Mentally Strong Method, right? You could come in with no knowledge of it and sit with me for a day from 9 to 4, where we actually go into how do I show up for myself, for the people that I love, mentally strong. So let me show you what we would do in that day and why. So we call it the Mentally Strong Reset for that very reason. Sometimes we just need to take a day and do a reset. So when you come in, the first thing we do is like identify a problem. Now you're probably like, I have tons of problems, right? But the whole point is to get it to a manageable place, because much of your overwhelm is from the enmeshment of all of the things that are going on. So the first thing is we identify a problem: anxiety, depression, discipline, maybe relationship issues, anger. You know, maybe you're going through a divorce and there's anger and fear. It doesn't have to just be one thing, but one problem that you feel like, gosh, I wish I knew how to be mentally strong in this place. And then we will create the vision around this. I have a friend who's going through a divorce, and I asked her, where do you want to be in 5 years? She's like, I don't know. I don't even care. Like, I just need to get through this. And my challenge will be, when you come to this Mentally Strong Reset, is who do you want to be in 5 years? I understand you are going through something very hard. And I can give you an example. Through the death of my son, I created Mentally Strong, which is, a national brand. But the death of my daughter, the unexpected death of my daughter, was literally the most traumatic. And as this was happening to me, and the realization that it was real and that I was going to have to get through this, my personal vision was that I would be able to come out stronger, right? And really authentically, not just, push through and pretend to be happy, but that I could authentically be mentally strong, which meant actually feeling the feelings. So when I get you to go through that personal vision, it is important to know where you want to be, right? Did I want to lose my daughter? Did I want to say, I want to be a mother, right? No, it had to be realistic. I needed to authentically be mentally strong in the midst of the absolute worst thing that could happen to you. And that was my personal vision. But it creates thoughts, right? You might be thinking right now, I don't even care where I am in 5 years. This pain is too much. Well, then maybe we would map out that pain, but you would come up with thoughts that come to you when you think about that personal vision. What's holding you back from being able to say that you want that or have that? And this is a picture of a thought map. I don't have right now time to like really dive into a thought map. It takes about an hour, hour and a half sometimes, but we sit in those thoughts. So let's say you're depressed, and I have been depressed in my life. Obviously, grief can trigger this kind of deep depression. But so if you chose the word depression or depressed or anxious as your central thought, we would map that. What makes you feel like that right now? Well, obviously, I just lost my daughter, or obviously I'm going through a divorce, right? But what has made you feel like that in the past? When's the first time you felt like that? Likely in your childhood. And how does this impact your spiritual relationship? And so we spend time putting all of these things down on paper. It's like 20 years of journaling in 20 minutes. And so it is one of the most cathartic things about the Mentally Strong method. But this is what makes the Mentally Strong method different than other self-development tools, right? This is empowering you to know how to deal with this pain. And so we put it into 10 categories. And each of these categories, we do something different about. So the first one, triggers. Triggers for me is, if I see a picture of my daughter, or if I go to a place where we had a really good experience, that could be a trigger for me, right? And in our culture, many times people are like, I have to avoid my triggers. It is only a way of avoiding your pain. Triggers are just those external stimuli to remind you that there's something that you need to work through, okay? So I do not advocate for avoiding triggers. Obviously, for me, grief was a big part of my story. I think it's a big part of a lot of people's story, because grief is not just death. It is a loss of a relationship in a divorce. It's a loss of an expectation in an adult child. It's a loss of an expectation of yourself. It's a loss of a dream, right? But oftentimes, our grief gets enmeshed with trauma. And I talk about this a lot because losing a child is obviously traumatic. But when that trauma and that grief are all enmeshed together, right? Like a ball of yarn that the cat got a hold of. When you hold on to trauma, it literally eats away at your body, physically, mentally, emotionally. Grief is a pain that you are allowed to feel, that is your story, right? But when you enmesh it with your trauma and you hold on to it, it's eating you up. So I teach you how to separate that grief and trauma so that we can honor the pain of our grief. I will always allow myself to feel that pain, but let go of the trauma, release the trauma, do something to get the trauma separated from the grief. But trauma gets enmeshed with all kinds of things. And if you don't like the word trauma, you could use the word injury. We all have injury. We all have things that have negatively impacted us. And so we don't all have big trauma, but we all have injury. And those things get enmeshed. They often get enmeshed with negative thoughts, right? So when you're thinking negatively about yourself or about a situation, it likely comes from either a learned experience or an injury that caused you to think negatively of yourself. And every self-development program that you will ever go through will talk to you about your negative thoughts. And I've done those things. But when I was doing them, I was like, yeah, but this is not helping with my grief. This is not helping with my trauma. This is not actually decreasing my anxiety. So negative thoughts are an important part of, or reframing those negative thoughts and finding positive things to fill our mind with is definitely part of the story. It's not the whole story. Going on, anxiety and worry. I talk about this a lot. Anxiety is a natural thing. It is a continuum. If you are telling yourself not to be anxious, you're doing it wrong. Okay? We need to take anxiety and bring it down to a manageable level. Remember I talked about the fight or flight? And if you are fighting or feeling like you're going to run, right? That is moderate to severe anxiety. But if we could bring that down to mild to moderate anxiety, we can actually be productive. You see how that's different than don't be anxious? And do you see how each of these categories has something different? Behaviors and choices. This is where you take accountability for choices that you've made that may have contributed to the outcomes, right? But with compassion and with understanding, right? So I'll give you the example of taking responsibility for, gosh, the day that my son died, if I would have taken him to the emergency room, he might have lived, right? Do you see how that's also enmeshed with negative self-talk? Like I somehow had some, grand ability to control those kinds of things, right? So the act of, taking someone to the hospital when they are sick is a choice, a behavior that I can take accountability for, but I can also do it with compassion. And we'll get to, spiritual conflict of that was all enmeshed in the pain of the grief and the trauma and the negative thoughts. And when I separate it, I realize as a human, I have always done the best that I can do at any moment in my life. I am trying to make the right choice, right? But there are times in my life where I have made choices that actually had a consequence. And this is the section where you take responsibility for that. Injustices. These are the things that we have no control over, right? The fact that two of my children and my husband had a rare neurodegenerative condition is an injustice. And there's lots of injustices in this world. People will talk to me about political or social injustices, and you can dedicate your life to trying to make a difference around an injustice, but in the big scheme of things and in the day-to-day and how it's emotionally impacting you, we have to put that into the I don't have control of this, right? And it's not fair. And you remember your mom telling you life isn't fair? And there's truth to that. But if we can put it in its own category and say, you know what, life isn't fair, but I can also choose to, dedicate time and energy to an injustice while working through the other categories. So that is why injustice is its own category. Spiritual conflict, we don't talk about this enough, but I obviously went through extreme spiritual conflict. Anytime you are distraught about grief and death, you need to be able to wrestle with what you believe happens after death. And for me, I thought I knew. I thought I believed in a God who was loving and protective. And if I just prayed for my family, they would be protected. And then hardship after hardship, death after death. I had to wrestle with my God. And this is the place to do that. And to separate it from the negative self-talk or the grief and the trauma. Like, these are different things. And when you come to a mentally strong reset, you get to take your problem, map it out, put it into these different categories, and really be able to come up with a plan of how do I show up mentally strong here. The last category is addiction. This could be, significant addictions that are impacting your life, or it can be, mild addictions. And each category does not get worked on at the same time, right? But addiction is very different, and it does have to do with trauma, behaviors and choices, negative self-talk. Like, there's often a lot of things incorporating into the addiction, but the addiction also begins to have a biological change in your brain, and new neural pathways have to be developed, and that's why it also has its own category. So when you get to the end of your Mentally Strong Reset Day, we begin to figure out what are some core things that came out for you. We call these core connections, core beliefs. They could be positive as far as values. They could be negative as far as things that you have struggled with your whole life. For example, for me, I'm not enough comes up almost all the time. And being able to identify that to kind of decrease the intensity in which it shows up in your life. And then we leave the day with redefining that personal vision into something that you know you can accomplish in who you want to be. And during that time, we do activities to kind of help organize. We do trauma release. We do sound bowls. The whole day is taking that problem and leaving with a plan. I really hope to see you at the next Mentally Strong Reset. There is a link in the description that will take you on a journey. The best place to start is the free training where, I start talking about the Mentally Strong method and invite you to the Mentally Strong Reset.